mostly hoped she would turn up safe and well.
It's such a big lie. Why would he make that up?
It was so horrific. She was very talented, beautiful, and then you question everything.
A con man, a charlatan who was adept at getting sex and money out of women and who ruins women's lives in order to further his own gains.
The whole thing was shocking because we obviously thought we knew these people, and then all of a sudden you find that you don't actually know anyone at all.
Murders don't happen in sleepy little country villages.
Nestled in the rolling Sussex hills lies the picture postcard village of Duddleswell.
Duddleswell is a small village, nearly the highest point in Sussex.
It's an ancient hunting ground. It's a mixture of some wooded areas and open heathland. We're up quite high, so yeah, it gets the weather.
Duddleswell is in the Ashdown Forest, which is the inspiration for the children's author A.A. Milne and his Winnie the Pooh books.
It's tiny. It's a sort of blink and you miss it. It's sort of a few houses and the tea rooms down the road.
Probably 200 or 300 people, I'd imagine. Probably more sheep and horses than people.
It's close to, say, the city, London. So it's in the middle of everywhere and in the middle of nowhere, to be honest.
The best described as sleepy. In the summer, tourists come through and the tea rooms do a good business, but basically it's a backwater.
There's not a great deal that goes on out here.
But in 2008, something out of the ordinary did happen, and life in this idyllic village changed forever.
Hello, darling. It's me. Wherever you are, just please get in contact.
Local villager David Chenery Wickens is trying to reach his wife Diane, who seems to have disappeared.
I'm at home, wishing you were here with me now.
He reports her missing to the police.
Please, Diane. I'm going frantic here. Please phone me. Love you.
Every missing person case is treated on its own merits. So there will always be circumstances taken into account. Was this usual behaviour? Was there something about the individual that made him or her vulnerable? And according to all of those circumstances, we would grade a missing person either as high, medium or low risk. With Diane, it wouldn't necessarily have been treated as a high-risk missing person and wouldn't have garnered as many resources as perhaps somebody else would have done.
There must be hundreds of missing people in Sussex, and they crop up from time to time. Often there's a very innocent explanation. Often somebody disappears because they want to disappear and try a new life elsewhere.
News of Diane's disappearance shocks the local community, where she's a popular villager.
Diane was very pretty and very, very articulate, very well spoken and very interesting.
Lovely, really lovely, quite quiet.
But the rather reserved Diane hides a high-flying, glittering career, bringing a spot of Tinseltown to the Sussex backwater.
Diane was a hugely popular, super talented makeup artist for the BBC. She had won an Emmy, which is the top American award for television. She'd been nominated for a BAFTA, which is the British equivalent. And she'd worked on hugely prestigious series such as Pride and Prejudice, Casualty, League of Gentlemen. She was multi-skilled, and here she was at the midst of her stellar career.
It's husband David, though, who seems to attract the spotlight.
He was quite an imposing character, quite quite gregarious, quite larger than life. I think David was the dominant partner, a lot more outgoing.
He's also a star in the kitchen, where he volunteers at the nearby railway centre, the Lavender Line.
Very good cook, dished it up very nicely as well. Was charming to the customers, very pleasant, easy-going person.
David's other talents are otherworldly. He's an accredited spiritualist who prays with like-minded souls in the local community.
Our first meeting, he was our medium for the evening and took the service for us. He was very, very pleasant, very professional.
He did style himself very much as a reverend. David frequently appeared in the pub with his dog collar on. We didn't see him very much not in his dog collar.
Seemed to be no end to his talents. They just seemed a lovely couple. They got along well with nearly everybody, it would seem. They always seemed very normal, just normal.
Police delve into Diane's seemingly normal life. Then 6 days after her disappearance, appeals are made for her whereabouts in the local press.
Living in Sussex as I do, when the alarm went out that there was a missing person, this is not unusual in any part of the country, but the person who was missing was very unusual. To have such a super talented makeup artist at the BBC suddenly disappear seemingly off the face of the earth was a very good story.
Sometimes there will be an investigation which causes concern, which does hit the media interest and the public interest. Diane would have been one of them because it was so out of character. No obvious reasons for Diane to have disappeared. So that type of investigation would have gathered a lot of public and a lot of media interest.
The national media descends on this quiet Sussex backwater.
The first time I heard about Diane going missing was when I just came indoors with my husband and the front door knocked and there was a newspaper reporter talking, telling us that Diane had gone missing, and it really upset us.
It was everywhere that she'd gone missing. It was in the local news, it was on the radio that she was missing. It was, everyone was talking about it.
From that point onwards, there was a great deal of interest in the community. It did become a point of conversation very quickly.
A lot of the things that people were saying was that they just thought that she'd gone away, left him.
Her devastated husband, David, confides he fears the same.
He thought that's what she'd done and that she'd gone to London. I do remember hearing that a few times from a few different sources, that she'd gone to London, but no one actually knew where she was, which was strange.
Detectives dig deeper into Diane's last known movements.
Chenery Wickens claimed to the police they had both taken the train from East Grinstead Station up to London because Diane had a pre-arranged meeting at the BBC. And they agreed to meet afterwards at her hairdresser's. And Chenery Wickens told the police that he was there at the rendezvous and she didn't turn up.
Diane's mobile is traced to London on the day she disappeared. But something in her phone records doesn't seem right.
Text messages had been sent from Diane's phone to some of her friends. Now, this was an immediate matter of suspicion to the police, because if someone had deliberately gone missing in order to start a new life somewhere else, they would not contact friends in this way. So was this some sort of pretext to try and send the Sussex police off on a wild goose chase?
More suspicious was the fact her messages were signed Di, not her usual sign-off, Diane. Police suspect someone else could be using Diane's phone. And there's an unexplained mystery about her last known location.
The police established that there had been no pre-arranged meeting at the BBC, so she had no reason to go there.
Detectives need to trace where Diane went after saying her goodbyes to David at Kensington Station. So they scour the CCTV.
Ideally, the CCTV would start to be reviewed from the point that the two separated. So that would be the start point. Where did Diane go? Did she meet somebody else? Can we track her through Shepherd's Bush, White City and what have you?
They started going through all the CCTV footage and they couldn't find her anywhere.
Actually, Diane was never in Shepherd's Bush. And at that point, you would start working backwards along her journey.
Police tried to trace Diane to where the couple's journey began.
They also had CCTV taken at East Grinstead railway station showing Chenery Wickens getting on the train alone. No sign of his wife.
It's such a big lie and so easily disprovable. Why would he make that up?
Duddleswell, East Sussex. Spiritualist David Chenery Wickens has been arrested and questioned about his wife's disappearance. He claims Diane accompanied him to London for a meeting. But CCTV shows him making the trip alone.
The police may well have had deep reservations about Chenery Wickens. They knew that there had been no pre-arranged meeting at the BBC, so there was no reason why she would have gone there.
A search starts at the couple's cottage, but this leads to a dead end, so detectives turn back to the CCTV.
When they confronted Chenery Wickens with the CCTV, which proved that he had lied in his explanation, he immediately apologised and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, yes, I did lie to you then, but that's because I was embarrassed because my wife decided that she was going to leave me, that she was so ashamed of our debts and so ashamed that our marriage was failing that she decided to leave me. So I invented this story. Terribly sorry."
Once he'd been arrested, it was big, big news locally, and the local paper was all over it. When we went out with David and Diane down to the pub, it was good fun. There's no signs of any issues. And then when you actually find out that something like this has happened, it's like a shock, particularly from a sleepy community of a few hundred people in a fairly affluent area. You just don't expect it.
Once his wife had suddenly gone missing, they thought, maybe he has something to do with this.
But with no firm proof David's behind the disappearance, 4 days after his arrest, he's released.
David was bailed pending the investigation. Effectively, what you had here was a no-body murder investigation. Clearly, the police suspected that Diane was dead because the arrest was made and he had been arrested on suspicion of that. Proving that a murder occurred and that David was responsible without a body would have been incredibly difficult.
The police were in a quandary. They could not prove that she had not left him and had disappeared wanting to start a new life. It was impossible to prove something like that or disprove something like that.
The police need to have control, and sometimes that's giving somebody enough rope, if you like, to hang themselves. Sometimes that control is sitting back and watching what happens. So that control is sometimes just space.
Police had to step up inquiries around the village and spreading in a circle outwards in a sort of search. But it's such a rural area, it's such a massive amount of land to cover, it was virtually an impossible task. And with a manpower shortage that Sussex Police had at that time, it was not the best use of the time. It really turned into a waiting game.
Detectives put the couple's marriage under the microscope. They speak to friends, family and acquaintances, trawling way back to when Diane and David first met. And they discover the respectable spiritualist reverend isn't what he seems.
It seems that Chenery was working as a driver in a delivery company, and amongst his routes was to deliver to the BBC. So it seems likely that this is how they met, and he had at that time some skill or interest in reading tarot cards. And it may well be that this is how they first met, and that she then fell under his spell. She'd had a previous boyfriend, which was very emotionally disturbing breakup, so she was in a very vulnerable state when she met Chenery, and they embarked on this whirlwind romance. He was slightly older than her, that she could trust as a rock in her life. Within a matter of weeks of her meeting Chenery, she had moved Chenery into her Battersea flat. Now, he arrived with all his worldly goods and possessions in a carrier bag. To move into a nice Battersea flat was clearly an upgrade on anything he'd had before. That was the moment, I think, that he decided that Diane was a keeper.
And in no time, the couple decide to tie the knot.
There were huge red flags flying all around the wedding and the day of the wedding in the eyes of Diane's family. First, when they found out that he had arrived and moved in with just a carrier bag's worth of his worldly goods, which suggested he must have a dubious past, shall we say, to say the least. Secondly, he couldn't find a single man to be best man. He had no male friends that he was willing to put forward. And so one of Diane's friends had to step in.
By the time they make the move to Duddleswell, the ex-lorry driver David has been enjoying his newfound wealth with Diane.
She had the financial input into the relationship. It was certainly her money that kept the house, kept the cars, and I think financially he contributed very little to the relationship. His relationship with Diane, even though they were married, there was a side to his relationship that she was completely unaware of.
Detectives discover Chenery Wickens has been leading a double life. By using his spiritualist charm, he's been exploiting a string of other women too.
He was a very plausible, charming man, particularly as he had joined the United Spiritualist Church, gained accreditation through them, and had taken to wearing a dog collar and calling himself Reverend. He claims that he could communicate with the dead through, apparently, a Native American spirit called Wild Fox. And there were many women, emotionally vulnerable, recently bereaved, who were ready to believe him. An opera singer, Chenery Wickens, had wanted £21,000 from her, claiming that he had prostate cancer. Well, he didn't. Secondly, an alternate therapist said that Chenery Wickens had told her that she should lend him money because he was going to divorce his wife and sell the house. Well, he didn't do that either. There was a whole series of cons that he had carried out, often at a time when he was also having sex with these women.
Marlene Thompson started up a local spiritualist group with Chenery Wickens, but it wasn't long before she too began to question his motives.
At some point, he asked every one of us what the value of our houses were, and he seems to pick on people, especially ladies, who have confided in him with problems within their marriage. Probably just after a year of us all meeting, everybody was beginning to fall out with each other. I did know that David was having affairs with several different girls at one time. He kept it pretty quiet. I knew because the girls confided in me what was going on.
Chenery Wickens even targeted Marlene.
David did ask me to have an affair with him. I was very tempted at that particular time because my marriage was a bit iffy at that particular time. It's strained, and it is that when David knows that there's a bit of problems, when women are vulnerable, that's when he takes advantage of them. I was quite infatuated, I suppose, because he was 5 years younger, but I couldn't do that to my husband.
And to achieve his aims, the so-called respectable reverend seems happy to lie about his own marriage.
David told us all that he was divorced from Diane anyway, that she was a horrible person, she was very vicious, and they had got divorced. We discovered that he wasn't divorced, he was lying to us. With all the lying and the way he was talking of Diane, I decided then that circle had to close.
After speaking to his work pals at the Heritage Railway, the Lavender Line, detectives discover David's been spinning the same yarns.
He had been quite clear, as far as we knew, that his marriage was at an end. We knew he was still living with Diane, but as far as we knew, they were living, albeit in the same house, living apart. And as far as he told us, the marriage was ended, and she knew that.
He was talking about selling his house. So he's going to have to sell the house because him and his wife were splitting up.
But as far as Diane was concerned, they were happily married. Her husband explained the periods away from home womanising as time spent caring for his son, who had a brain injury. Detectives discover this is also a big lie.
Diane chose, consciously or otherwise, to turn a blind eye. She stayed loyal, she stayed over-trusting, and she let him get on with whatever he wanted to do.
After Diane's disappearance, her husband's lies show no sign of abating. Whilst out on bail, he keeps changing his story.
He kept saying that she had left him and had gone to Spain and she was going to stay there, live there. So that's how he explained why she was missing.
Obviously, for him to come up with she's gone off to Spain, when he had already said they'd gone off to London together for a meeting on the train, and she hadn't come back afterwards. It obviously began to make people think this chap is not telling the truth. Certainly, the people on the Lavender Line had their own sinister theories about it.
Lying is an art form. It really is. You need to know what you said to different people at different times about different things. And it's incredibly difficult to keep that going for any period of time. But being proven a liar only proves you're a liar, does not prove you're a killer.
But 4 months after Diane's disappearance, just a stone's throw from the end of the Lavender Line, a dog walker makes a gruesome discovery.
Decomposed human remains were found yesterday in East Sussex.
No longer a missing persons inquiry. This was a full-blown murder inquiry.
Diane Chenery Wickens was reported missing by her husband on January the 24th this year.
4 months after Diane vanished, a body is uncovered in undergrowth, 10 miles from the family home. Diane's husband David has been exposed as a cheat and fraud. He's the prime suspect behind her disappearance.
A woman dog walker made a gruesome discovery, but very close to the lavender line where Chenery Wickens had worked.
Forensic investigators inspect the crime scene. Local farmer Michael Fordham arrives soon after.
We'd arranged to come and cut our crops with the combine harvester. We arrived at the entrance on the A26 to be met by the police cordon saying road shut, keep out. There were police vehicles everywhere. I believe there was tents and people in white coats. So yes, it was all very intensive police investigation. The body, I believe, was found in this wooded area underneath these big trees. So not too far away from anybody, but when the undergrowth in July is all up and growing, very difficult to see, and therefore the reason why she wasn't found for such a long time.
The body's later identified as that of Diane Chenery Wickens. Her missing person case is now officially a murder inquiry.
To have one and a body found in a field boundary here was quite shocking, really, and quite horrific. And this is a quiet hamlet. Don't expect a murder, but that's the sad fact of life.
It's the news that Duddleswell and beyond is dreading.
Just shock, I think. Just couldn't believe it. Just felt very sorry for her.
It was so horrific. She was very talented, beautiful. Just, you can't imagine something like that happening, and then you question everything.
We all obviously hoped that Diane would turn up safe and well in some way, so it was very shocking to find out that this lady had apparently been brutally murdered.
The discovery of the body suddenly propelled the entire case back into the headlines. A multi-talented BBC makeup artist murdered in a remote location and a wonderful idyllic country village backdrop. It was a perfect copy for the newspapers.
Meanwhile, scenes of crime officers are on the hunt for the tiniest of clues that will link Diane to her killer.
And you absolutely cannot rush forensic recovery because you only get the one opportunity. You're now looking at what evidence can Diane still give us, what evidence can we gather from the environment in which she was found, and how does that relate to our suspect?
No attempt had been made to dig even the shallowest of graves. She had just been discarded in undergrowth. So wildlife had got to her, and of course 4 months of decomposition meant that a pathologist had no chance of finding out the cause of death, how she had died. There were other fascinating quirks to the discovery. Diane's wedding ring and eternity ring were missing from her left hand.
They're very personal things to happen. And although not necessarily direct evidence as such, would tend to indicate that somebody who knew her was involved in her death.
And there's another bizarre twist to Diane's discovery.
So alongside the corpse was Diane's very distinctive cowboy boots. And the police had to ask themselves, would a stranger make such a seemingly significant gesture as this?
Whoever placed them had left the stretching devices to ensure that the boot kept its shape. They were still in situ, so clearly Diane hadn't worn them there.
Now, there was no way a stranger or a random attacker could have found these boots with these shoe stretchers still inside them. It had to come from someone who had access to the house and to the bedroom. This was a serious mistake made by the killer.
So it certainly changes the nature of the whole investigation.
The finger of suspicion points firmly towards Diane's husband, David. the only other person with access to their marital home. With the body found just a quarter of a mile from the lavender line, his volunteer work there also puts him in the frame.
It's so unusual for a killer to dispose of a body in a place they don't know. You will almost always find a connection from the killer back to the location of a body.
David Chenery Wickens is re-arrested immediately.
The husband of an Emmy Award-winning makeup artist faces further questioning by police today.
The shockwaves were all around the fact that David had become a member of the railway, had become part of the village community to that extent, had become a ordinary Joe in the pub, and that suddenly we have very good grounds now as villagers to believe that he was not what we thought.
Wouldn't have thought he'd be capable of doing it or anything. You know, totally out of character. I think there was a certain amount of shock. Really, you know, do I know this person?
Forensic teams once again pore over the couple's cottage.
The home address would have been considered primarily as a crime scene itself, and then secondary as a source of intelligence about where Diane had been, what happened to her, and to prove or disprove David's involvement as the killer.
Hidden in a small wooden box, officers uncover Diane's missing wedding and eternity rings. They're sent off to the forensics lab, and the results are incriminating.
The police were able to establish that the rings had minute traces of blood on them, and what's more, clear evidence that they'd been ripped from the fingers of the owner.
The forensic examination of Diane's jewellery was useful because it showed that she was wearing the jewellery when she was bleeding. But it certainly adds that little bit of evidence, that weight of evidence to say she was alive when she was wearing that jewellery and had suffered an attack.
As the rings were never found on the first top-to-bottom search of the home, police suspect David returned to his dead wife's body to retrieve them.
The sheer callousness of Chenery Wickens could be seen in the way that he'd clearly ripped rings from his dead wife's fingers, rings that she never ever took off, according to friends.
Investigators soon uncover the killer's plans for his wife's precious rings.
The missing rings from the fingers was set the police in motion immediately to go and make inquiries at local jewellery shops and pawnbrokers. And it wasn't long before the police found CCTV at a pawn shop showing Chenery Wickens trying to pawn some of his wife's jewellery. The fact that Chenery Wickens was able to pawn it for a mere measly £100 or so shows the depths of depravity and deceit that this man was capable of.
Over time, many more of the Reverend's sordid affairs come crawling out of the woodwork.
So the confirmation that Diane had been murdered ran through the village like a shock bolt. And those women who had known and had, particularly those who had sexual relations with Chenery Wickens, were now coming forward, having realised that the man who they had trusted and had been taken in by and comforted by was potentially a murderer. And a huge body of evidence quickly emerged for the police.
One ex-lover tells police of a very sinister phone call.
Very close to around the time that Diane disappeared, David spoke to an ex-girlfriend asking how you clean up blood.
Her first reaction was, well, how on earth did you get bloodstains on your carpet? To which she replied, oh, I had a terrible nosebleed. Well, at that time, she had no reason to disbelieve him, however implausible that may have sounded.
He was advised to use salt. That type of evidence doesn't show David as a killer. It shows him making a phone call about how to clear up blood. It's when you start putting all of this evidence together, this very strong circumstantial evidence together, that begins to take things beyond reasonable doubt.
David Chenery Wickens appears in court charged with Diane's killing. And a date is set for him to stand trial.
This was crucial evidence for the police, taking the case beyond suspicions that Chenery Wickens was a conman, a charlatan who was adept at getting sex and money out of women, to evidence of Chenery Wickens being a potential murderer.
In Duddleswell, East Sussex, the spiritualist and charlatan David Chenery Wickens has been charged with the murder of his wife Diane. 8 months after her remains were found, her husband finally stands trial at Lewes Crown Court.
Chenery Wickens, despite the mountain of evidence against him, insisted on his innocence and pleaded not guilty to murder.
Individuals will have many different reasons for pleading not guilty. Some because they're clasping at anything to not be convicted. I think in David's case it was just, I don't want to be caught for this.
Court reporter Paul Cheston is there to see the spiritualist led into the dock.
I was at the trial for certain days. Throughout I sensed that Chenery Wickens was confident that he was going to get away with this case. He didn't seem worried by the amount of evidence that the police and the prosecution had assembled. It was very much a circumstantial case because no one had seen him obviously kill his wife or even dump the body. But even circumstantial cases can be very strong cases, and this was one.
Some people will go to court absolutely convinced that they are able to persuade a jury that there is enough doubt that they cannot be convicted. They have a warped sense of their own abilities. They have a warped sense of what did happen.
But the prosecution lays out the events leading to the night of Diane's murder. The day that she uncovers some home truths about her husband.
He was spending quicker than she was earning, and the debts were up to something like £17,000, and the shadow of the bailiffs was cast across their front door. She was getting very concerned. And when she found an itemised phone bill which showed not only the number of times that her husband was phoning various mistresses, but also the huge amount of money he was spending on gay chat rooms, and suddenly the worm turned.
It's believed Diane threatened to end their marriage. And the fake reverend responded with rage.
This was the moment when Chenery Wickens realised that she was worth more to him dead, when he could now sell the house and live the life he wanted to do, inheriting her estate, than alive, when all he had to look forward to was being thrown out of the house and a messy divorce.
Diane was a means to an end for him. And when his whole lifestyle was threatened, that's when Diane died.
Chenery Wickens murdered his wife as a spontaneous explosion of violence.
Though Diane's remains can't confirm how she died, the prosecution reveals the panicked call David makes to his mistress, asking how to clear up blood. After dumping Diane's body near his workplace, he then calculatingly leaves a message on her phone.
Wherever you are, just please get in contact.
As she lay dead.
Please, Diane, I'm going frantic here. Please phone me. Love you.
But the mask slips when the court hears from women and men who were invited over by Chenery Wickens for sex immediately after Diane's murder.
We came to know that he had a voracious sexual appetite. The prosecution's case was made up almost entirely with women who had been seduced by Chenery Wickens, whether for money or for sexual favours, who came forward and really gave a detailed picture of what this charlatan was like, with revealing insights. They gave evidence against him, some anonymously and others using their name.
Next, it's the Reverend's turn to take to the stand.
Chenery Wickens himself looked straight at the jury and told them about his great spiritualist beliefs and that he was a man of God. He laughed at the suggestion that he could be a murderer. He said that his beliefs and those of the church forbade any ill thoughts of or words or deeds, let alone a murder. And as a reverend in this church, he knew what would be waiting for him, presumably on the other side, should he ever do such a thing.
Now, he will explain to the jury, I had nothing to do with it, but I am the victim. And quite often when people take the stand, that's how they try and portray themselves, as the victim.
He tried to blackguard Diane's name by claiming that she was the one who was having all the affairs and not himself. He came up with a bizarre suggestion that Diane had not been murdered at all. She had taken her own life, that she had committed suicide because of the shame that she felt because of the mounting debts and because of their failed marriage.
But under cross-examination by the prosecution QC, the cool Chenery Wickens begins to crack.
By taunting him in the witness box, pressurising him, he was able to show Chenery Wickens losing his temper. And I'm sure this is when the jury thought, that's what happened that night. He lost his temper and he hit his wife.
Following a trial lasting more than a month, Chenery Wickens finally faces justice.
The jury were not taken in by any of the lies and charm and bluster from Chenery Wickens in the witness box and returned a unanimous verdict of guilty to murder.
The fake reverend is jailed for life, with a minimum of 18 years. Outside court, Diane's family responds to the verdict.
It wipes out once and for all the many lies that have been told about Diane, and it removes a dangerous, predatory charlatan from society.
The family never found out exactly how Diane died. The lack of remorse and the not guilty plea, I think, were all sentencing factors.
Diane's brutal killing has ever since haunted her village of Duddleswell and beyond.
You don't expect to have these sorts of incidents like this, and the shock waves that run through small communities like this are huge.
I wished I'd never met the man. I would never believe another word he said.
The whole thing was shocking because we obviously thought we knew these people, and then all of a sudden you find that you don't actually know anyone at all.
Murders don't happen in sleepy little country villages. To think that a husband can kill a wife, of years of marriage dissipated at a drop of a hat, it's a truly shocking image.
It was like an out-of-body experience. I tried to turn him over and I was scared of what I was going to see.
He was found located in a pool of blood. He'd suffered a horrendous amount of injuries throughout his body.
This sort of thing doesn't happen in our little village, you know. Everybody can't believe it had happened, a murder in our village. No.
It takes a man who has a lot of hatred in them to do that to
to him.
He was very cunning, very cunning. He'd always tell you half the story.
It was an act of deceit. It was clear that this was a murder that had been motivated by greed.
On the western fringes of Shropshire lies the tiny village of Halfway House.
Shropshire's a massive county, very rural, and Halfway House is a typical Shropshire hamlet of around 900 people.
It's a really peaceful place. I mean, I open my front door and it's just, the only thing I'll see is cows. Yeah, I love it.
Halfway House, it's a very cute village. It's very calm, tranquil. A lot of the people around there they know each other. They know everyone's business, quite frankly. It's a cute place to be.
Everyone's really good to each other. Everyone does look out for each other. The best way to describe it would probably what you'd see on Postman Pat when you were growing up, when he was around delivering his mail, and it's a real village, close-knit community.
It's a popular pit stop for holidaymakers travelling to the Welsh coast. And here you find Tony's Diner, owned and run by 67-year-old Satnam Singh Bluga.
Everyone really called him Mr. B. We all had difficulty pronouncing the second name, and he was well liked. Larger than life, I would say.
You'd walk in the cafe or in the takeaway, and the first thing, big smile on his face and a massive handshake. He used to greet everybody who come in there.
But becoming the diner's owner wasn't an easy journey for Satnam Singh Bluga.
Originally a taxi driver in Delhi, wanted to create a better life for himself. When he'd come over, he started working in the hotels and restaurants. My dad always had this dream. He wanted a fish and chip shop business of his own. I remember when we pulled up at the diner, this huge 96-seater restaurant, his eyes lit up and he knew this was the one that he was looking for. As his son, I was the center of his universe. But I know for a fact he loved that diner just that little bit more than any of us, from put his heart and soul into it.
After 14 years of hard graft, it's a thriving business.
He worked at 7 in the morning till 10, 11 at night. We had a 20-foot menu. We did everything from fish and chips to sirloin steak, to curries, to roast dinners, to pizzas. The menu was absolutely huge. You used to watch him making the pizzas and he was such a show-off. He would get the dough and he'd throw it up into the air and he'd catch it and flip it round. I think some of the people just used to come to watch the show of him flipping the pizza. I think everyone just treated it like the hub of the community and they'd get to meet each other.
But life at the diner and in the village will never be the same.
Monday the 26th of June was a typical summer's day. It was the one day in the week that the diner was closed. And on that day, a delivery driver arrived. And the idea was that he would provide all of the stuff that they needed for the week ahead. When he turned up, he couldn't get a response.
Goes next door to the post office to ask if there's a key available for him to go into the diner to drop the delivery off. The postmistress there doesn't have a key, so she then therefore attempts to make contact with Harry.
I remember my wife calling me around 3:15 and saying, "Dad's car's here. The windows are all open, but there's no sign of Dad."
Monday is Mr. B's one day off, but he should be at home above the diner. So his son rushes back.
come home, put my key in the door, walk straight up the stairs, right down to his bedroom, and I'm banging on the door and he's not answering, and I keep banging on the door, and time passes on and there's still no answer.
Harry makes his way downstairs into the main diner.
Got a swing door into the kitchen, and instantly I can see in my mind what is just a spillage of some sort. I push the door open and it's dark in the kitchen, and I could just see this spillage, and it's going across the ground. What I initially thought was just a spillage was a streak of blood. And then I hit the switch of the kitchen lights, and I see my dad face down. And I just remember screaming out and calling out to him. I don't know why. I think I already knew then that I wasn't expecting a response, and I went over to him and tried to turn him over. He had these just two big circles around his eyes and some injuries to the side of his face. I could see some stab wounds in his back, but I just remember touching him, putting my hand on his back, and just feeling absolutely cold.
In a panic, Harry dials 999.
And I remember ringing them and just telling them to get there quick. And they said, look, we want you to try and resuscitate him. I could see that there was no sign of life, and the operator kept screaming on the phone, you have to turn him over, you have to turn him over, give him CPR. And I just kept saying to her, I can't do it, because I'd seen the injuries when I tried to turn him over, and I was scared of what I was going to see.
So Harry summons help from a neighbour next door.
She comes through the door, and I remember her first words just were like, oh God, and she took the phone from me and eventually saying to the operator, look, there's no point. To which the operator finally gave up.
West Mercia police and paramedics race straight to the diner.
Ambulance contact police to say that they are en route to a male that's been described as being assaulted and has suffered a lot of blood loss. Uniform officers initially respond to it, and upon their attendance they speak with the paramedics, and they establish that Satnam is unfortunately deceased. Once they're satisfied that there's nobody else in the premises, they then secure it for later examination by scene to crime officers and detectives.
DCI Mark Bellamy is the senior investigating officer on call. Soon he arrives on the scene.
Satnam was found located in a pool of blood. It was obvious that he'd suffered a horrendous amount of injuries throughout his body, causing significant blood loss. The offender, in an attempt to hide his body, had then dragged him from the initial point of where the assault had taken place to a point in the kitchen where he couldn't be easily located. Obviously at this time, Harry is extremely upset. It's clear that Satnam has been dead for a number of hours, and performing CPR was a pointless exercise.
It's like an out-of-body experience. It's like a dream or a nightmare or something. I think not until the point where the paramedics come and the police arrive and I sit down and eventually take a glass of water just to drink. And I remember having this burning feeling in my stomach. I just felt sick and still can't comprehend what's actually unfolded in front of you.
The police now launch a murder investigation.
The first thing the police would have been thinking was, is this a robbery motive, or is there some other reason behind it?
There were a few things that were causing me a little bit of concern. The fact that the upstairs window was wide open. Was this a burglary that had gone wrong? Or was it something as simple as something closer to home?
They'd want to know who was working there. They'd want to figure out who the witnesses might be, who had come, who had gone. So they asked lots of questions, including, who were the employees and where were they now?
Soon it becomes apparent that 2 members of Mr. B's live-in staff are mysteriously missing.
I've got to build up a picture around what have they done, where are they? Is it an innocence, absence, or is there something more sinister to it?
I was driving home from work and I've never seen so many police cars. There must have been 12 or 13 of them. A couple of ambulances there, all the lights still going. I thought, God, what's happened, you know? Phoned Mr. B up. This was on the Monday, because I'd go for a pint with him on a Monday night. I was supposed to meet him for a drink.
Mark keeps on trying, but his friend isn't picking up.
I went up the pub at the halfway house just to talk to a few locals to see if anybody knew anything, because I was a bit worried actually, you know, and nobody knew anything. Maybe at about an hour later, a couple of his relatives come up and they had to actually ask for me. I said, what's happening? And I said, what's happened to Mr. B? And then he said to me, Mr. B is deceased. I nearly fell over. I must have turned a whiter shade of pale, you know, and because then I couldn't speak for a bit. I thought, I went outside, I thought, I can't believe this, you know.
Then people started talking and they had rumours, and I believe that they had told me it'd been a stabbing.
We knew something had gone wrong. It became knowledgeable that somebody actually had died. We didn't know what they'd died of, how they'd died. We just knew somebody had been found dead at the diner.
I went back inside and I just gathered a few of the locals together and said, I've got to tell you something, Mr. B's been murdered, you know, he's dead. It's horrendous, it was, you know. God, I've never heard a busy pub go so quiet in all my life. Never. This sort of thing doesn't happen in our little village, you know. I think it really shook the village to the core. You know, everybody, it just couldn't believe it had happened. A murder in our village, like, you know, no.
It was almost eerily quiet in the pub. People were taken aback. They were a bit shaken about it. So we chose to just close the doors, lock up, double check the locks. The shock in the community meant that people were more, they wanted to be at home. They wanted to be secure and safe. I also think they were just shocked and saddened at the death of Mr. B, and kind of sitting in a pub doesn't quite sit right when someone's lost their life the way he did.
Following the stabbing at Satnam Singh Bluga's diner, detectives from West Mercia Police are trying to find witnesses and potential suspects.
The priority of the police, of course, in that golden hour is to collect any evidence that might lead them to whoever was responsible. So they were looking for weapons, for knives, anything that they could get DNA off, or fingerprints to prove who the killer might be. They would make inquiries to see who was in the scene at the time and whether they were still there or they'd left.
Meanwhile, detectives question Mr. B's son Harry about his father's last movements.
Inquiries were being made in the background in order for me to satisfy myself that Harry wasn't involved. We were able to do that very quickly, and we were then sought to sort of build up that picture around Satnam's life in the last 24 hours.
I remember sitting there with the inspector, and it was just everything came out.
Police learn all's not been well behind the scenes at the much-loved diner.
Mr. B was known as a bit of a Gordon Ramsay, I think, because he was a no-nonsense person. People might have described him as being harsh. He liked the job to be done and done in a particular way.
Because he was hard-working, he also had high standards, and at times he wasn't afraid to let people know when he thought that they weren't meeting his high standards.
There'd been a couple of fallings outs with some of the staff. Someone had had too much to drink and things had got out of hand.
No one seems to know what that was about, but the end result was there was some kind of violence and tables and chairs got broken in the diner. To this day, I don't think his son Harry ever got to the bottom of that, but it left him quite concerned about the types of people that Mr. B would sometimes employ.
Some of these staff were struggling immigrants, just as Mr. B once was.
To show you the measure of the kind of man that he was, from time to time he offered work to people who came from the same part of India that he came from Punjab. And from time to time he would offer them accommodation. So he lived at the diner and he also had rooms where staff could stay.
His phone would go off. Brother, I've been here X amount of time. I really need a job. Can you help me out? He'd come over as an immigrant himself. He was always looking for someone to rescue, and maybe he's seen a bit of himself in these people, and that's why he employed them when he did.
But Harry didn't see eye to eye with his dad.
My argument was there's no background checks. You can't obtain a reference, and you're employing people that you don't know nothing about, and you guys are all living under one roof together. And I would say to my wife, one day something's going to happen, I just can't explain it. I knew something was going to go south.
Soon, detectives learn of a sinister event. Just the day before Mr. B's found dead.
A local customer had been in the diner on the Sunday and overheard an argument coming from the back around the kitchen area. And this witness told the police that he couldn't understand the language, but they realised it was an Asian language and realised that there was a loud, raised voices, a row between two people.
By now, police have identified the two missing staff who work in Mr. B's kitchen and live above the diner. 58-year-old Belkar Singh and 30-year-old Ram G, otherwise known as Romy, who police immediately home in on.
He was young, he was fit, he was strong, and on the face of it, given the number of injuries sustained by Mr. B, it looked likely that he might be the candidate for the murder.
But Mr. B's killing is shocking news to Romy.
My friend, he rang me and he said, this happened, Mr. B is, his body is in kitchen and he died, And I'm shaking all on that time, I remember. So my all is shaking, I'm shaking, panic, I just, how can I tell you? He is good boss. He's treat me like grandkids.
Romy returns to Halfway House, where he's questioned by police.
And he take my all statement around 4 hours. He take my all clothes, my phone, everything, I still remember. And next day, he take me in the police station, and over there, I gave all statement, whatever,
Romy, though, has a cast iron alibi for his whereabouts in the last 24 hours.
With Romy, it was really easy to get identify where he was. He was very open in his account with us, told us that he'd gone to Leicestershire for a music concert. We could quite easily corroborate that account through financial and through intelligence inquiries.
It became clearer every minute to the police that Romy simply couldn't have done it. The one person who was missing and unaccounted for was Belkar Singh.
Another staff member reveals more to police about Belkar Singh's movements on Sunday the 25th of June, the day before the body was found.
We know from the female worker that Romy had left about 20 to 3. She'd finished her duties just before 9 p.m. and then left. So she was able to tell us that Belkar Singh was left alone at 9 p.m. with Mr. B.
She'd seen Mr. B cashing up. He then waved her goodbye, and she said to him, "Have a lovely day off with your granddaughters." She was the last person, apart from Belkar Singh, who had seen him alive.
So detectives seized the diner's CCTV, putting Belkar Singh's every step under the microscope.
From reviewing the CCTV, we could see that just before 5:20 in the morning, Belkar goes towards the skips and he appears to deposit something in there. And then within 5 minutes, the refuse company is turning up and emptying the skips. That sort of starts to get, adds to my suspicions. And then we know at 6 o'clock he's getting into a taxi and he's dragging behind him a huge suitcase.
Police need to urgently identify what Belkar Singh disposed of and why the worker who rarely leaves the diner is making such a hasty escape.
All roads seemed to be leading to Belkar Singh. He was someone whose whole life revolved around that restaurant, and for him to just disappear like that was deeply suspicious.
Belkar Singh was nominated by myself as a suspect on the night of Monday the 26th of June. Therefore, we're then starting to focus down onto him in order to locate him, in order to try and establish why he's disappeared.
By a process of elimination, the spotlight fell on Belkar Singh, and now that he'd gone, the hunt started for him.
Halfway House, Shropshire. Restaurant owner 67-year-old Satnam Singh Bluga, known locally as Mr. B, has been found brutally stabbed in the kitchen of his diner.
There were in the region of 65 wounds inflicted to Mr. B by the means of a sharp-edged weapon. I just cannot understand what would go through someone's head who'd want to inflict that level of injury on somebody.
A manhunt is underway for Mr. B's employee, Belkar Singh, who's mysteriously disappeared hours before the body was found.
There was no apparent reason for Belkar to get into a taxi at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Monday on his day off.
But suddenly contact is made, with the prime suspect himself, by his fellow kitchen worker, Romy.
Given that Belkar Singh had disappeared literally into the night without a trace, everyone was concerned to know where he'd gone. Romy made a call to him.
I tried to ring few times and he not answer, and finally around 7 o'clock he answered.
During the phone conversation between Romy and Belkar, Romy discloses that Mr. B is dead.
He said, "Really? This is his reaction, that's it."
He didn't express any surprise to Romy, which immediately started to raise some concerns with Romy and his partner, and she took the decision to actually record the phone conversation.
Singh also makes dubious claims about Mr. B's movements the night before, the last time he was seen alive with the suspect.
He said to me, "Mr. B is going pub night time, and he eat food and then he sleep. Mr. Singh lying, Mr. B going to pub, blah blah blah. We normally just going Monday, because Monday we have day off. Mr. B never ever going pub without me."
He's given an account which doesn't really tie in with what we know around what Mr. B would do. He's saying that Mr. B went to the pub on a Sunday. That didn't happen. Mr. B would go to the pub on a Monday. So we're starting to doubt the accuracy of what Belkar is telling people.
He was very cunning. He'd always tell you half the story. Even on his day off, where are you going today? If he was going north, he'd tell you he's going south. And you couldn't trust him. So obviously, all of my attention and all my suspicion went to him. That could be the only person that was with my father that night.
As police work round the clock to hunt down their suspect, they manage to trace the taxi that picked Singh up, with a large suitcase.
From a subsequent statement given by the taxi driver, Mr. Singh was dropped off at Hilltop at West Bromwich, many miles away from Halfway House. The taxi driver recalls that he went to the bus stop, he noticed that he was looking at the timetables, and the taxi driver drove off, returned to Shropshire, leaving him there.
So we're then trying to utilise the CCTV cameras to track his movements, and from there we can see that he's gone into the shop and he's bought a top-up for his mobile phone, and there are other CCTV opportunities that allow us to track him onto a bus, and from there we were able to establish that he's gone towards the Handsworth area.
Mr. Singh had got family and friends in the Handsworth area of Birmingham. It wouldn't have taken them very long at all to track Mr. Singh.
We know that Belcar had a phone with him and that we were able to track the mobile phone. Officers are dispatched, and we're fortunate that on the Tuesday morning we're able to identify Belcar leaving an address in the Handsworth area, and we follow him for a short distance where he was arrested then on the street.
The police then went into the address, and there they found that big suitcase which had a padlock on it.
The suitcase is locked. We force entry to the suitcase.
Inside that suitcase was nearly £50,000 in cash, along with gold and jewellery, all of which had belonged to Mr. B. It was clear to them that this was a murder that had been motivated by greed.
More incriminating evidence is seized from Belcar Singh, including Mr. B's mobile phone and some keys.
Thankfully, the keys in his possession, not only are they the keys to the diner, not only are they the keys to Mr. B's private residence, but there's also keys to the locks on the suitcase. To me, I'm starting to feel reassured that we've got the right man, and we're starting to build up that evidential picture to show his involvement.
All of these turned out to be critical pieces of evidence in the case that the police were building against him.
Without delay, Singh is taken in for questioning.
During his period in custody, Belcar was pulling out all the tricks in order to delay being interviewed. Whether this was just to try and give him a little bit of thinking time, or whether he thought that we would just go away, I don't know. But he started complaining that his brain wouldn't work if he was questioned for more than 30 minutes. He was saying that his eyes were hurting and he had to go and see an eye specialist. So we had to get him sent off to the local eye hospital for an examination. When he came back, he started to complain about the food. There wasn't enough. So he was given 2 portions of curry. Then he complained there wasn't sufficient chicken in the curry.
Whilst police deal with an awkward interviewee, rumours that the suspected killer has been arrested spread back to Halfway House. It's welcome news for Romy, who was once in the frame.
Then I a little bit relax because I live local over there, and everyone is think about me because I'm a young person, and everyone think maybe I do those things,
When I saw the fact that it was Mr. Singh, I was quite shocked and saddened that someone that Mr. B had trusted had chosen to do that to him.
It was a relief that they found somebody, and I think if I remember even myself thinking, really? Really? How did he do that? And why?
Back at the police station, Belcar Singh finally breaks his silence.
He starts to overplay some of his medical complaints. We know he's described as being partially sighted, but I believe he starts the game now of trying to overplay those vulnerabilities in an effort to say, look at me, I'm a frail old man. I couldn't possibly have committed this offence. I've learned over the years that people will try and do anything to get out of, admitted to their guilt, especially of an offence of such as this magnitude.
Under pressure, the suspect gives his version of events.
So initially, Belcar says that just before closing up time, he decides that he's going to go upstairs, he's going to have something to eat, which he does in his room, and then he goes to bed about 10:30 that night. He doesn't see Mr. B again. He gets up and he gets into the taxi at 6 o'clock to travel across to West Brom. He denies any knowledge of the murder of Mr. B.
So detectives press Singh about a blood-stained diner receipt, Mr. B's phone, jewellery, and £50,000 in cash that are all found in his suitcase.
Whilst he admitted that the case belonged to him, he was unable to give any account or any explanation for the items that were located within it, the items which we believe had been stolen from Mr. B.
3 days after Singh's arrest and questioning, DCI Mark Bellamy and his team are on the cusp of nailing their prime suspect.
We've recovered 2 bloodied knives from a cupboard within the kitchen at the diner. We've conducted a Home Office post-mortem on Mr. B, which says that he'd suffered a number of injuries inflicted on him by a bladed weapon. We have the fact that CCTV doesn't show anybody else entering that diner. The items of property recovered from the suitcase have now been identified by Harry that they were his father's possessions. So with that, I believe that we've got sufficient at this moment in time to go to CPS for a threshold charging decision. And thankfully they were of the same mind and gave the authorities to charge Belcar Singh with the murder of Satnam.
But the hard graft for the investigators is only just beginning.
Getting him arrested and getting him charged is probably only the start of the investigation. We're now tasked with building a thorough and complete investigation in order that we can convince a jury beyond all reasonable doubt that the person in the dock has actually committed this offence.
In Shrewsbury, Shropshire, kitchen worker Belcar Singh has been charged with the murder of his boss, known as Mr. B. As police build their case for the forthcoming trial, the lab has been testing a T-shirt that was found at the diner.
On the neckline of that T-shirt was found DNA attributed to Belcar Singh.
But importantly for us, we've got airborne blood from Mr. B on the T-shirt, which shows that that T-shirt was in close contact to Mr. B when he was struck, and wet blood went through the air and landed on the T-shirt.
The police concluded that this was in fact Belcar Singh's T-shirt that he had forgotten to get rid of. It was a highly incriminating piece of evidence.
But there's something even more compelling linking Belcar Singh to the murder scene.
There's a Lonsdale trainer footwear mark within the blood. Now we're told by at least 2 witnesses that Belcar Singh wore Lonsdale trainers. We never found any Lonsdale trainers, and it's my view that at 5:13 when he's going to the skip, he's depositing his Lonsdale trainers into the skip and they're subsequently taken away by the refuse company. So unfortunately we never recovered those.
As cunning as he was, Mr. Singh knew that the bins were collected on a Monday at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning.
Belcar Singh denied that he ever wore them. He said he wore some Skechers.
It was those shoes that would be the downfall of Mr. Singh.
Not only have we got witnesses telling us that he wears Lonsdale trainers, but we've also got him on CCTV on the Sunday, going into the post office earlier in that day, and he's wearing Lonsdale trainers. So he's lying.
And Singh's Lonsdale trainers would provide police with the final piece of the forensic jigsaw.
They identified some footwear marks leading away from the blood pool towards 2 kitchen cupboards. When they opened up the kitchen cupboard, located within there were 2 knives. We were able to establish that Mr. B's blood was on the handle and on the blade of one of those knives.
Barely 6 months after Mr. B's horrific killing, Belkar Singh is brought before Stafford Crown Court, accused of murder.
Mr. Singh denied all responsibility and had pleaded not guilty, and now had to face the jury with the evidence.
The prosecution sets out its case. Belkar Singh is portrayed as a man in debt, on edge as he's long overstayed his work visa. The murder of Mr. B is his way out of his predicament.
The prosecution explained that it was planned by Belkar Singh, although appearing quite frail and unassuming, had somehow, out of some jealousy, planned to kill Mr. B for his life savings.
We know that he was sending money back home, and therefore there was a motive now around finances.
It all suggested that this was a crime that had been motivated by naked greed. He was a poor man. He was trying to keep his family in India back home. He decided that the only way to get his hands on all that cash was to dispatch Mr. B, but he did it in the most extraordinarily brutal fashion.
Knowing he'd be left alone with Mr. B on the night of Sunday the 25th of June, Singh seized his moment to pounce on his victim.
The belief was that he'd been hit over the head with a metal pan in order to daze him before he was stabbed. He was attacked with at least 3 different knives, including a meat cleaver. It was clear that he'd been on the receiving end of a frenzied and brutal attack.
Having carried out this terrible attack on Mr. B, Belkar Singh's had the forethought to rifle through his trousers and remove the takings from the till receipt and the keys from his trouser pocket, which then enables him to go upstairs into Mr. B's private room and gain access to it, and therefore take the jewellery and the remainder of the cash.
While my dad was lying there in the kitchen with all his injuries, for all I know, he probably got himself a few hours kip before he got up and left the next morning. The state of mind to do that baffles me. Absolutely baffles me.
Now it's the turn of Belkar Singh's defence.
We were faced with a mountain of evidence. It's difficult representing someone in those circumstances, but it's important that everyone who stands trial in one of our courts has a fair trial and has someone representing them who is going to do the best job that they can. In presenting Belkar Singh's case to the jury, we emphasised the fact that he was so small and with such terrible eyesight, all of which was documented by his optometrist, that he couldn't be the sort of person who would commit this crime. He moved very slowly. Witnesses who worked with him said that he was like a sloth. The jury were clearly puzzled by all of this.
And when Singh is asked to take to the stand, he makes the most of his moment.
When he would walk over to give his statement, he'd make sure that his steps were small, calculated, maybe bump into a table on the way. Mr. Singh was very clever in front of the jury to maintain the act.
Faced with the forensic evidence placing him at the murder scene, Singh changes the story he first gave detectives.
It became impossible for Belkar Singh to maintain his story that he hadn't seen the killing or been part of it, and so he made up a new one. He told the court when he gave evidence that in fact what had happened that night was that he had been in the kitchen with Mr. B when 2 intruders had come through the side door.
They came in through a door that wasn't covered by the CCTV, and they started to have an argument with Mr. B. This was an argument over an old business transaction which resulted in them attacking Mr. B and killing him with knives.
He tried to intervene, but he couldn't. Once the violence had ended, they took him upstairs, frog-marched him to Mr. B's bedroom, and then ransacked his room. The jewellery, the gold, the cash, everything was stuffed into a suitcase.
And this is where it gets slightly fanciful, is that they tell Belkar Singh, we know where you live, we know where your family are in India, you're going to take all this money away from the diner, and at some stage we'll catch up with you later and you can give us the money.
It was an extraordinary story, but it was the only one that he could come up with.
The prosecution, though, is having none of it.
The question was put to him if these fictional characters that had come into the diner, why were their footprints never found? To which he spinned another yarn and come up with a very unbelievable story.
They had taken their shoes off to go upstairs. Well, they're really considerate murderers now, aren't they? That they don't want to get blood on the carpet of Mr. B's upstairs apartment. It was incredulous.
After weeks of high, intense court drama, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
It was a very lonely place to be. Day after day, we would sit there waiting for a decision, and there was still no verdict. And thinking, when is this all going to end?
A real emotional roller coaster. And the moment that when the jury returns, well, that's where my head and my stomach are absolutely turning, if I'm honest.
The tension was extraordinary. No one knew what the outcome would be until the foreman stood up and said the word guilty.
Finally found guilty, and we could draw a line underneath it.
The jury comes to the rightful conclusion, and it's an immense sense of relief.
Belkar Singh is sentenced to life, with a minimum of 27 years.
I remember when the sentence was read out, Mr. Singh just dropping to his knees, and it was some satisfaction in the devastation that I'd seen in him. The only people that are left suffering are the immediate family that have gone through it, and that never ever leaves you. It never ever leaves you.
Harry has since sold his father's beloved diner.
I still dream of my dad. He's running around in the diner, serving customers. When you lose that one person that treats you like the center of their universe, and then one day it's gone, you never really come to terms with it, but you have to live with it, I suppose.